It is a slow realization over time, but you go to one event after another, and the person setting up the microphone, making everything happen is Norm. And there comes a point where we have to recognize we couldn't do it without him. We are incredibly lucky to have Norm Stockwell. I'm far less interested in our speaker this evening than I am in the remarkable mix of people that are present in the room here. And it is a delight to note that there are a couple people in this room who do not remember the 60s. And that is a good thing. We are very happy that I'm looking in the back at a couple of you and very glad you're here. I'm delighted that Amy Monluck is, I think Amy's here, right? Yes. There's Amy. There's Amy, who has bridged so many generational and political lines with grassroots leadership and the stuff she's doing now. Terrific player. I know we recognized that Paul Buell is here and Mary Jo Buell. I just want to say that we in Madison sometimes get a lucky break, and that is the people that we send off to do other things come home. And Paul and Mary Jo have come home and contributed so much to this current dialogue that we're having about the Port Huron Statement and the history, but also every struggle. And I just want to say that Paul is not just a radical historian. Mary Jo is not just a radical professor. They are radicals of the moment because they were out there every single day at the Capitol as we protested last February and March. And we're just delighted to have Paul and Mary Jo back with us. It's a remarkable thing. You're raising your hand. What is this? Yes. Oh my gosh, I was telling you it's called Port Huron. This is all the better. Yes, this is we're going to do our regional connections. It's fantastic. And you know, tonight we're going to completely cede all of our concerns about Michigan. Although I will say that Upper Peninsula is ours. Ceded. And I'm just going to recognize a couple other people. And the only reason I'm doing this is not to highlight some folks above others, because we have so many people doing incredible work of the moment. We've got Blue Cheddar here. Right up but I do, you know, it is remarkable that what came from this campus and what came in the 60s and the 70s and went out to reshape and change movements across this country and around the world. And it would be remiss if we didn't note that the person who headed our Wisconsin AFL-CIO for many years, but more importantly, who used that position as head of the Wisconsin AFL-CIO to go national with U.S. labor against the war and to put our trade union movement in this country on record as opposed to George Bush's illegal and immoral wars is David Newby, who is with us here tonight. And seated next to David is my favorite historian, Alan Ruff. So I promise not to go row by row. Let me just, although this is the bottom line, I love Madison, I love Wisconsin, I love the fact that we are an activist community, and it is a multi-generation activist community that has done remarkable things and that continues to do it. Let me just read one line here from a fine text which makes an excellent holiday gift, whatever holiday it may be, the Port Huron Statement. And the introduction closes out, the wonderful phrase for its introduction, the society beyond. And it closes out with this phrase, the vital democratic connection between community and leadership, between the mass and the several elites, has been so wretched and perverted that disastrous policies go unchallenged again and again. This is a fundamental message. For way too long in the United States, coming up to the time when the Port Huron Statement was written, but then in more recent days as well, we have allowed horrible things to go unchallenged. We have not stood up and said this is absolutely unacceptable. And there is a reason why what happened a year and a half ago, almost a year and a half ago now, in Wisconsin has become such a big deal internationally. Why when I go to Brussels or to London, when I'm in New York or Washington or LA, people want to talk about Wisconsin. And because Wisconsin rose up in February and March of last year against the fundamental lie, the fundamental crime of austerity. The fantasy that budgets should be balanced on the backs of workers with cuts to public education and public services. And amazingly enough, that was a central thesis that underpinned the Port Huron Statement 50 years ago, that people needed to rise up against economic elites that controlled both our economic power and our political power, who had marched, as Robert M. La Follette and Edward Ryan warned, not just for a place in business, but for a place in the political life of the country. Now, the Port Huron Statements inspired a lot of people. One of the people they inspired is sitting back there working on the city budget, the current mayor of Madison, Paul Sogla. No minor thing that somebody who read the Port Huron Statement is the mayor of Madison, and was the mayor of Madison, and was the mayor of Madison. But the guy who did so much to pull the Port Huron Statements together, Mr. Hayden, who I've known for too long and respected even longer. I just want to give you one perspective on Tom Hayden. Well, the Port Huron Statement is a very, very big deal. A huge and epic statement. There's a reason it has been included in anthologies with the Declaration of Independence, with the Constitution, with the Emancipation Proclamation, because it is a statement of great importance. But what was more important about Tom Hayden is when he got done writing it, he went out and did things. And it was actually very much in the tradition, the best tradition of the founders. You know, Tom Paine didn't just write common sense. Then he went out and stirred things up. And Tom Hayden didn't just stir things up in the 1960s, which people know so well. He kept stirring things up. And I revere Tom Hayden for the work that he did in the transitioning of the 60s movements in the 1970s into economic justice campaigning. When Tom Hayden ran for the U.S. Senate from California in 1976, it was viewed as a fully audacious act. It was viewed as insanity. Right? It's a crazy thing. Tom Hayden, the student radical, the guy who's been, put on trial.
Yeah, it was crazy.
It was a crazy move. It was nuts. It was covered in the Berkeley Barb and the New York Times. And the incredible thing about that campaign was that Tom Hayden lost. Everybody thought, well, there you go. We've proven that this thing doesn't translate, right? That you can't go from a radical politics of the streets to a radical politics where you make electoral demands. But Tom Hayden didn't stop there. The only reason he ran for the Senate in 1976 was to start to build a list. And he went across California and built the Campaign for Economic Democracy that helped to transform the politics of that state. There are still people who serve in political positions in California who are inspired to come into politics by the Campaign for Economic Democracy and still hold that our politics ought to be about economic and social justice and peace. Some of them serve in the Congress of the United States to this day. Tom Hayden himself spent 18 years as a state legislator in California moving powerful pieces of legislation and making that state dramatically better. Proving to my mind one of the most important things you can prove. That electoral politics does not always have to be the fundamental disappointment that it so often is. Electoral politics can be a place where we link the movements of the street with a movement toward economic and social justice where we seize power and do something with it. That's been the lesson that Tom Hayden has brought to us, not in the 60s, but in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and right up to today. And I will close off my introduction of Tom Hayden simply by referencing the funnest time we ever had together, which was in Seattle in 1999, outside the WTO, on that wet, rainy first morning when all of these incredible students were locking down in the street and blocking the most powerful economic interests in the world from ushering in a new era of international austerity and international redistribution of the wealth upward. And the incredible thing was you had these, beautiful 18 and 19-year-olds locking down in the middle of the street, and there was this white-haired guy, like going down, sitting down with him, saying, "You are doing exactly the right thing, and if you want to see somebody who was suddenly transformed from a serious California legislator into an excitable 12-year-old, it was Tom Hayden on that day, because the fact of the matter is, while he has had enormous success as a writer, while he has had enormous success as a political figure, while he has had enormous success as a transformative leader over many generations, Tom Hayden remains the kid who likes to go out in the street and stir things up, not just to demonstrate, but to make power